There was a special relationship between the students and the priest, and it was more than just as a teacher-student. They really cared about you. They really did. And we developed wonderful bonds.
Providence College is in my mind. I got a great education there. Fantastic. Remember, Jewish people couldn't get into Brown, so they went to PC.
As I look back, you say during your lifetime, gee, if I had gone in this path instead of that path, things would have worked out differently. And so I've often felt if I hadn't come to Providence College, who knows where I would have been.
Providence College, although it was still a young school, in terms of the Jewish community, was known as a very welcoming school. They were all very humble. How much the PC experience meant to them. Because again, like so many Jewish people during the 40s, where there was discrimination, here was a Catholic college reaching out.
I think that the combination of the Catholicism that the fathers expounded mingled with what my parents had taught me about being a person in the world and the Jewish importance to my life made me think about items that came up during the period of time.
I'm Jewish. I went to a Catholic institution. I could not have picked a better school. I felt more Catholic than Jewish going to that school. If I can leave you with anything, to this day, my heart is for Providence College. Yep. How's that?
On February 14th, 1917, Providence College was officially incorporated by a vote of the Rhode Island General Assembly. Permission from the Vatican followed. It was the fulfillment of a dream of Matthew Harkins, the second bishop of the Diocese of Providence, to establish an institution of higher education for Catholic men, many of whom were the sons of recent immigrants. With the priests of the Dominican order at the helm, Providence College opened its doors to the first incoming class in September of 1919.
The question came, what are you going to name the place? And the first choice, the Dominican choice, was that you name it Bishop Harkins College. Harkins didn't want anything to do with that. So they agreed on Providence College, both having a religious connotation and locating the college in the city. It was founded specifically in the bishop's mind to provide an opportunity for the poor students who couldn't afford to go to Manhattanville or couldn't afford them, or even to Boston College or Holy Cross, to allow them to get a Catholic education on a college level. So it was established to protect the faith of college-level students and providing them an atmosphere and a quality education.
By the end of the 19th century, the Diocese of Providence had become a model of Catholic social and educational institutions for the entire country. These institutions offered assistance and education to all, regardless of religious affiliation. Such an approach was a recognition of inherent dignity of every person. It was also a guarantee of tax exemption, especially at a time when political forces in Rhode Island were seeking to remove these exemptions from Catholic charities and schools.
The function that it began with, and that was to serve a Catholic immigrant community in Rhode Island. But from the beginning, it was open to all. As a matter of fact, a little known fact about the college is that it's not a Catholic college. Legally. It is a private institution incorporated by the state of Rhode Island that happens to have a history of control by the order, but there is nothing in the charter that makes it Dominican or Catholic. And so it is open to all. And that was intentional. There was still very intense anti-Catholic prejudice, including this state. And so they very carefully engineered it in this way.
The charter of Providence College was modeled on the charter of St. Vincent de Paul Infant Asylum, a charitable institution established in 1892 and headed by the Sisters of Mercy. It was devoted to the care of sick and orphan children in Providence. Both founding documents made it clear that the people of all religious backgrounds would be served.
At the end of the 19th century, Providence was regarded as being the best and most fully established diocese in the country in terms of its social and educational institutions. It was a model for the entire country. We had everything here.
In 1922, the first Jewish student was admitted to Providence College in the school's fourth incoming class. Joel Novogrodsky from Westerly, Rhode Island, enrolled in the college's 2-year pre-medical program. Over the next several years, more young Jewish men from Providence and other cities in Rhode Island and southern New England would seek admission in the new Catholic Liberal Arts College. In 1926, Benjamin Burr Levin was the first Jewish student to receive a degree from Providence College, a 2-year pre-medical certificate. In 1930, Siegfried Arnold was the first Jewish student to receive a 4-year degree from the college, a Bachelor of Philosophy.
In 1930, there were 30,000 Jews in Providence, divided pretty evenly between North and South Providence. If we looked at the demographics, if you will, or you looked at the occupation level, they were small businessmen, they were peddlers, they were very few, if any, professional people. But you have to understand this. One of the primary motivations of Jewish parents was for their children to get an education.
The number of Jewish students admitted to Providence College spiked in the early 1930s. In the fall of 1930, about 5% of the incoming freshman class was Jewish. The fall of 1931 saw a dramatic increase. Of the 240 incoming freshmen, 39 were Jewish, 16% of the class of 1935. Jews numbered more than 10% of the freshmen in 1932 and 1933. The number would fluctuate between about 4 and 15% over the next decade and a half. Between 1922 and 1950, nearly 400 Jewish students passed through the gates of Providence College. In addition to recording standard, vital information about students, the earliest transcripts also had a space to list the student's parish or local church. As the number of Jews and other non-Catholics increased, college administrators began listing students' religious affiliations here. In the 1940s, a revised transcript had a space for religious denomination.
My mother said, you'll eat at home, you'll sleep at home, you'll study at home, and you'll go to Providence College if they will take you in. Within a few days after my application to Providence, I received, yes, you can be a student here. And I think my mother was dancing with joy. And my father, of course, was pleasantly surprised because the tuition was within his means at that time.
We went there because it was a great school. Then secondary, you could go because the money was not an issue in those days, like it is today.
Right.
Not an issue with us at all. Come aboard.
He applied to Providence College and was accepted. He was accepted around the time that his father passed away and realized that he wouldn't be able to do that. But at that time, it was a different college, and the president of the college was very available to students, and Bob went to see him. It was Father Doyle, who was a wonderful Dominican, and Bob went to see him and said that he appreciated the acceptance, but he would not be able to do it because there was no money, and there were 4 other children, and Father Doyle said, that's okay. You go to class, you do well, you help to take care of your mother, and you will never have to pay anything to the college. And that actually happened.
Growing up in a very, very poor family, college wasn't even a consideration. And the amount of money that I got through the GI Bill of Rights covered the expenses at tuition, what have you, at Providence College, which is a very important factor, particularly in those days. So I liked what I saw. I liked the ambiance of the college, and so I decided on PC.
Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Brown University had in place an informal quota system that limited the number of admissions for Jewish students. Even if Jewish students gained admission to Ivy League campuses in the 1920s, they found themselves with very limited opportunities and facing widespread discrimination.
The feelings were very, very good. It was in the neighborhood. You could go home for lunch if you wanted to, as far as that goes. They could commute easily or walk to classes and go to work afterwards, because most of them had to hold a job in order to afford the $100 or so tuition. $400 was out of the question, and chances are they were not going to be accepted. Not because they didn't have the grades, but because of an unspoken system.
background.
I applied to several different places, including Rhode Island State, and PC and Brown, and I don't know, maybe one or two others. Hey, my father, having gone to Brown, wanted me to go to Brown. My father had to leave in his sophomore year. He enlisted in World War I. And I went up to see the dean, and the dean said, well, Hoffman, everything is okay. Your grades are all right. Your extracurricular activities are fine, but our quota for this year is filled. I said, what do you mean by your quota? He said, well, we only take a certain number of Jewish students each year. So I went home and I told that to my father. He said he would make a call. And I said, you make the call, you go. Because I won't go there.
Brown did have a program up there where the number of Jews that were admitted was not the greatest in the world up there. They were very selective in what they did on this thing. And unless you had a patron or anything else, you really had to either fight or you had to have a lot of money to do it, or you had to know somebody to get in there. And that's why most of them went to PC on the thing. Oh, but they couldn't get into Brown. I mean, he said it was closed. That was the answer. That's the reason I guess that was the only reason I went to PC instead of Brown, or at least the only place I could go that had a college.
Enrollment data from the period shows that the college tracked the number of students coming from local Catholic high schools, as well as 3 other categories: Jews, Protestants, and Italians. Jews living in Newport, Woonsocket, and Fall River, Massachusetts also enrolled at Providence College, some of them making the trip by hitchhiking several times a week.
I could never afford being on campus. I commuted by hitchhiking.
So there was no good public transportation between Fall River and Providence?
Oh, there was a bus, there was a train.
It was easier to hitchhike.
Well, it was cheaper.
One of the guys also at PC had a car. He was a wealthy one, and he had 4 passengers, and we would pay him for the gas, very little by the week, and he would take you both ways. Science labs last in the afternoon, and what I spent most of the time to get home was to hitchhike. Because you could take a bus, but the bus wound around through Providence and then got to the terminal, and you got another bus to Fall River. So it took me more time to take a bus and streetcar than to hitchhike, so I hitchhiked.
I took the streetcar up to PC, and I got off and I see the Gothic architecture, and I see all the crosses, and I say, oh boy. But at that time, the dean was a Father Foley. And when I walk in, he says, Hoffman, classes start the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and I don't expect to see you in the holidays. When the holidays are over, you come in, I'll have your books and your classes all set for you. And he and I, over the years, became very good friends. And even after I graduated, or I didn't graduate because of the war, I used to go back to see my folks, and I would always go up to visit Father's grave because he was a superior human being. And I had a lot of friends that I felt that way about.
Providence College did not have a quota system. PC also provided an affordable education. Tuition was very low. For example, a semester tuition bill from 1924 totaled $90. Jewish students in considerable financial hardship were often granted scholarships or jobs to cover the cost of their education. The location of the college in the north end of Providence also meant the school was easily accessible to the immigrant population that lived there. Irish, Italian, Armenian, and Jewish immigrants had settled in the North End in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Their children and grandchildren were the first students at the college.
PC was on River Avenue, and I guess I walked there, and which was not too far from where it was it a mile or 2?
When I looked out my window, we lived right in front of a big hill that goes from Tyndall to Huxley, and I would see a lot of Jewish boys. I knew they were Jewish boys because they didn't wear yarmulkes, but they wore soft hats to school, and they'd be walking, always dressed beautifully, walking up Huxley Avenue to go to Hawkins Hall, because that was the only place at that time where there were classes, was Hawkins Hall. you know. And many of the doctors from our neighborhood or from Rhode Island at that time had graduated from Providence College. When we moved to this neighborhood, Mrs. Krause, a Jewish lady, lived on one side, and we had 5 or 6 Jewish people right in the immediate neighborhood who were all very, very nice. In those days, the Catholic Church, in fact, you weren't supposed to perform servile works on Sunday. That was sort of like a sin. But we know that Saturday was their holy day, and they couldn't do that on Saturday. They couldn't perform servile works on Saturday. Well, it bothered my father very much. It didn't bother him that we hung out clothes on Saturday, but if they hung out clothes on Sunday, he'd get mad, you know, because he said, imagine hanging clothes out on a Sunday when you're not supposed to perform any servile works. But the Jewish people I found to be very, very nice.
My mother's ancestral roots were in the Jewish community. My mom was one of 11 children. The family emigrated from a shtetl outside of Białystok in what was Zaros, Poland. They settled in Smith Hill. My mom and dad met in downtown Providence in the 1930s. Both were working in retail. They fell madly in love, married, and proceeded to bring 8 children into the world, the oldest, yours truly.
They took us around, and I met this Father Parada. He was very nice to us. There was a place to park your car. And I remember one time I parked it and I got a ticket. So when I went to pay the $1 fine, they said, you don't have to pay because you're Jewish. If you weren't Jewish, we would charge you $1. We just want to show you how nice we are. We won't charge you anything. That pleased me.
The first day of our college curriculum, we sat around in front of Hawkins, and finally we were admitted to a room that had lockers in it and stuff, and a ping pong table. And that was where we could put our books and our winter coats and stuff and such. We were given a schedule, and the second class was a class in logic taught by Father Parada, who also made a great difference in my life.
I have one very fond memory. The first Friday I was here, I went into the cafeteria to buy my lunch and asked for a hamburger. And I was asked, do you know it's Friday? And that jogged my memory. I said, I guess I do. I'll have a tuna fish sandwich.
I took German as a foreign language. I enjoyed sitting in on the religious classes they had there and got a lot of information from that, as well as they asked me certain things about my religion as compared to the other.
Then I had a funny classmate, Jerry Kowinski. He was Polish, and he used to wear the wildest ties. And you know, in those days, by the way, another thing I do remember now, before I got in my freshman year, my mother took me out shopping for all kinds of college clothes, sweaters and shirts and slacks and everything else. First day I get into PC, you will wear suit coats, shirts and ties to all your classes. All my sweaters and sport shirts went back, and I had to get something to make sure I had to wear. But Jerry, one of the priests said, you're not wearing a tie, you can't stay in my classroom. Threw him out. So next day he comes in, he's got this big, big clouds tie on. You know? He says, Father, do you like this tie? What's he going to say at that time? But this was the kind of atmosphere that it wasn't a negative atmosphere.
I'll tell you another interesting story. It was in the amphitheater, a lot of people, and it was a Jewish holiday. And I said, I'll go to class. And Father English was a very, I don't use the word strict, but he was very, there was no fooling around. He come in, we all stood up, he blessed himself, we all sat down. Everybody wore a jacket and tie. There was no this stuff. And he looks through the crowd. This is when I was like a sophomore. And he says, Mr. Foreman, I stood up. He says, I believe this is a Jewish holiday. You're excused from class. I felt that big. And I got up and I left.
He told us that if he's not there in 10 minutes after the class is supposed to have started, then the class is not going to be held that day. And he used to wait outside the door for 9.5 minutes. And I'll never forget, he called on me one day and he said, Mr. Tesla, what is today? I said, Father, today is the date of whatever it was. He said, you dope, today is St. Jerome Day. I said I didn't know that from the Catholic perspective it was St. Jerome Day. But we made a good team. I thought he was a great professor.
They have a religious class, you know, talk about the Catholics. And any time you know that the Catholic religion is intertwined with the Jewish religion. So they had a question come up, and this Father Parada would say, I know how to settle it. Call him Mr. Scholes. And whatever I said, that was it.
So you,
whether I was right or wrong.
you were the authority.
Because I was Jewish, I was right. Yeah.
Because I remember when I was going to school, when I was getting ready to go there, we talked about religion and philosophy. And I said, you know what I have to take there when I go there? And he said, well, you have that Western Civ now, which I knew about, but you know, we were required to take 2 philosophy, 2 religion. They were required to take religion and philosophy also. And I said, well, did they make accommodations for you because you were Jewish? And what he told me was, I don't really remember. I wanted to learn about the different religions, so I took the classes that were based on Catholicism and the philosophies that were different than what I grew up on, because both him and I had such a strong background of the Jewish religion and Hebrew tradition that we didn't need to retake it again. Mm-hmm. But when I was there, like they offered, they said, we have a couple of classes in Judaism or Jewish history or philosophy, just so if you want to take that. But I remember what he said, so I never took it. I took different stuff, and that's what he did too.
Took a little bit of getting used to coming from a secular high school. Was sitting in class and looking up the cross. But after a while, that became part of my college learning too. So it's part of the package.
Father Schneider, he was the warmest, loving man. I'll give you an example. When we took our final exam with Father Schneider, one of the things we were to do was to write the Hail Mary in German. I remember it like it was yesterday. It's amazing how many years ago. I went up to him, I said, because I had a good relationship with him, as all the kids did. We all had a wonderful relationship with him. That time there was no hockey. He started club hockey. And I said, Father, would you object if instead of me translating the Hail Mary into German, I did the Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I'll translate that, the Shema Yisrael, into German. He said, absolutely. Great. That was the type of man he was. He was just a fine human being.
I made it abundantly clear when I was told, we start the class with Hail Mary, full grace of God. Would it be a problem for you to stand? I said, no, I'll stand and I'll say the Shema Yisrael, which is what I did. No big problem.
The only one I think that ever tried to convert me was Father George's. I said to him, Father, if you can explain the Inquisition to me, I might give it very serious thought. My cousin, Melvin Hoffman, was 2 years behind me, and when he graduated, he wanted to go to med school, and he applied several places, and he couldn't get in because there were restrictions on Jews in medical school at that time. In addition to what, he went to a Catholic school, which were points against him. So the father said to him, Hoffman, you come in and work as a lab assistant for a year, we'll get you into school. And they did. They got him into Hahnemann in the University of Pennsylvania, and he became a prominent cardiologist and internist in Providence.
Father Slavin and Father Doyle, I think their encouragement of me and their letters on my behalf to Georgetown got me a 3-year scholarship to Georgetown. All I had to do is keep my marks up. As long as I kept the marks up, the scholarship was automatically renewed. And I thought that I had a lot to owe them for what they did for me, because I think that had a great deal to do with my success in getting a scholarship. It wasn't easy to get a scholarship in those days.
I was the manager of basketball.
Where did the teams practice?
Hawkins Hall. There's a stage there. That was one basketball net. At the other end, when you walked into Hawkins Hall, through the entrance, there was another net. And if you got bumped at the other end of Hawkins Hall, where the stage was, you could hurt yourself. Because the stage was up there.
During those 3 years, he was really ingrained in the culture of the college, especially with the sports programs. They had a basketball team. I think they might have had a football team. And he would help out with the teams. He'd serve as a manager and help the administration doing different functions for the teams. And he was really involved in that. And Father Begley was the athletic director even back then. And so Father Begley took a real liking to my dad. And so after the first 3 years, he ended up giving him a room on campus.
My other brother was a student at Providence College, and he played football.
When Joe Mulaney, the coach, said to me that he wanted to give me a scholarship, that's great. I said to my father, I said, Dad, I'm going to go to Providence College. He said, where is it? I said, I don't know. I said, I think it's in New England someplace, but I'm not sure.
At the end of your freshman year, that's when you ran in your first election for student Congress representative. And I did, and I won. And I won each year thereafter. Eventually I became president of the student Congress. And it gave me an opportunity to do a lot for the school and kind of pay back some of the things that they offered me. I was chairman of different committees. I remember specifically, in my junior year, I was chairman of the ordinance committee. They would take care of bylaws and law, all the organizations on campus. And veterans were just coming back. They had been in Korea, and they wanted to organize a veterans club. And there was one person who was opposed to them having a veterans club. I said, how can you be opposed? These are fellows who served our country. So I says, no way in hell. You're not going to block that. And of course we let them have a veterans club. The last thing I ever thought of was running for president of the Student Congress. Particularly when I was running against a guy at Providence College with an Irish name. I said, what, are you crazy? The fellows from the Veterans Club came to me and said, we want you to run for president of the Student Congress. You did us a really good deed. You stuck by us, you stood up for us. You belong as president.
I was the first freshman that was accepted into the dramatic club in the freshman year. One of the problems was in December 7th, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, we were rehearsing for a play, The Fall Guy. I even remember it. And it was way ahead of its time because it was all about drugs. And the moderator was a Father Friel. And if anybody looked like a friar, he did. He was, looked like Friar Tuck. But he was a good man. He was the moderator of the Dramatic Society. He came down December 7th when we were rehearsing, And he said the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Where's Pearl Harbor? Nobody even knew where the heck it was. So the next day, 20 of us went down and enlisted, and I enlisted in the Air Corps.
June 7th, I went down to the draft board and I signed up as an enlisted man. And I finally ended up with a Signal Operations Battalion at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
We didn't go 4 years because the war came along, so we ended up collapsing it with the summer vacations. So actually it took about 3 years and a few months. And the same thing with medical school. 4-year course was 3 years. You finish on a Saturday noon with your final exams, and Monday morning starts the next year. Except for Christmas, when they gave you about 7 days off. Well, when you're going from Missouri, you're spending a day on the train and a day going back on the train. Didn't give you many days, but that's how it was.
And I imagine the environment on campus must have changed a lot once the war started. And
Well, everybody was in uniform. The bulk of them were Army. Small number were Navy. I was in the Army.
In the Army.
Yeah. With the regular Army, private, buck private, $50 a month. And 6 months later, you became private first class. Your pay was raised to $54.
Jewish students who entered Providence College in the 1940s frequently left early because they either volunteered for service or were drafted to serve in the armed forces during World War II. For example, Abraham Smith volunteered for the service and was killed in action in Germany in 1945. Some returned to finish their education, like Jerome Weintraub, who graduated in 1948. Many died or never returned to Providence College and became known as the Lost Class of 1944.
The Lost Class of 44 at Providence College. There was a whole group of students who came into PC in the 40s who never would have gone to college. As the story goes, one night in March of, I think it was 44, they were awoken in the middle of the night and told, "Get your gear, we're going to the train station." And this whole group then was transitioned into active service. Many of them served at the Battle of the Bulge. None of them ever came back to finish their studies at PC. Most of them were Jewish.
I enlisted right after the war ended in 1945. I enlisted in 1946. I was underage during the time of the war, when the war was going on. I was only 17 when I enlisted. I spent 1.5 years in Japan, the Army of the occupation. It was a good experience. I was sent to 8th Army Signal Corps School. I learned all about telephones and telephone systems and wiring systems, and it's a good experience.
Oh, my father had cousins, distant cousins in Poland, because he used to get letters from them and he would send some money, and then the letters stopped. And he never knew what happened to them. When you wore the dog tags, in those days it had the religion on it. In my case it said H, Hebrew. I think I still got it. There was a concern that if I got captured, what would happen. But I was young and aggressive in those days.
My husband was drafted when he was 18, and I know that he was at PC when he was drafted. And one day across his desk came a notice, must have been from Washington, I don't know, but he talks about this all the time. And there was a notice, and it said, if you have already started college, and if you can get us a note from the college that they will take you back as a student, we will give you a discharge immediately. And he wrote to Father somebody who he knew. He was discharged. He went back, came back home, didn't live far from the school, and he went back to PC. The men were very friendly with the Jewish boys, I think, because they were very respectful, as the boys were back to them, hopefully.
By the way, I remember specifically about the neighborhood. Everyone in the neighborhood, whether it was Jewish or non-Jewish, had a son in the service during World War II. And you knew it because every window would have this little banner, red with a star, signifying someone from that home was in the service. And every now and then you'd see a gold star, which represented that someone was killed in the service. But that's one thing I recall, extreme patriotism in the area.
I had this course I'd been teaching for a few years, and Father Doyle heard about it somehow, and he called me and he asked for an appointment. He came in, he knew all about me, he sat down, we started to talk, and I asked him about, you know, why we hadn't had this conversation before, and he said, I didn't need you before. Well, he didn't think he did, but I did, right? And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I have a collection of my papers and some photographs that I took. Let's see, the date was the 12th of April, 1946, when he was liberating a subcamp of Nordhausen, Mittelbau. And he said, and I have to give all of this material to you. And I said to him, why do you want to give it to me? Why don't you give it to the Holocaust Museum of the United States? That would be fantastic. Or even the Rhode Island Holocaust Memorial Museum. No. I want to give it to you. And what you're going to do is you're going to get it preserved, and you are going to get a physical space at this college so parts of it can be displayed always, so people who come to this college will know that the Holocaust happened. And I was like completely floored. I said, but how do you know you can trust me? He said, I can trust you. The most phenomenal thing to me was a gold and black ambassador candy box. And inside it were these partially curled up original photos of the carnage they found when they went into that concentration camp. I will never understand how he, overwhelmed as he was with all of it and its hideousness, went back to his vehicle, got his little brownie camera, and took all these photos. In his speeches, he talks about how the Holocaust changed him. It changed him. And it made him realize, and he agreed with Elie Wiesel, that hate is not the answer. That this must never happen again. People must know about it, and people must work toward accepting one another and, through the love of God, recognizing one another as brothers and sisters. You could tell that I was like, flabbergasted that there was no real growth in the understanding of the importance of Father Doyle's contribution, not just to the college, but to the universe as far as I'm concerned.
One of the things that got, strangely enough, mixed up in the whole PC community relations when I was president was the Vietnam War. And I took a strong position publicly against the war. I was critical of it, so I made a lot of enemies. And there were people that actually thought I was a communist because I was against the war. You know. I went down to see Senator Pastore one time just to talk to him about it. And I'm explaining my misgivings that it wasn't really a war, and we weren't too sure who the heck it was we were fighting against and why. And he says to me, "You're a socialist." Well, anyway, that crossed lines with some Jewish liberal thinkers who were also quite critical of that war. You know? And it put me in, it didn't put me in a good light with the Jewish community, but I think they saw me as something other than just this anachronistic old geezer or something. Mm-hmm. But I had to be careful in what I said. I didn't go to demonstrations and that sort of thing. And we had demonstrations on campus. I had stones thrown at me one time when I went out to try to calm some students down. So it wasn't nice.
The historical relationship between Jews and Christians has been fraught with tensions, distrust, and violence since antiquity. In the medieval era, persecutions and pogroms against Jews broke out across Europe. In cities such as Venice and Rome, Jews were forced to live in ghettos. Members of the Jesuit and Dominican orders often played a role in persecutions, forced conversions, and expulsion of Jews, particularly during the Inquisition period. In the early 20th century, some Catholic theologians mixed historical anti-Judaism with developing theories of racial superiority. The Jesuit theologian Georges Bichlamar taught that not even baptism could repair the genetic, moral defects that characterized the Jewish people. Other Catholic thinkers, however, urged the Church to reject anti-Semitism and to rethink its relationship with the Jewish people in light of Nazi anti-Semitic ideology and the horrors of the Third Reich.
Oh, at that time, it was, you're a Christ killer. And the same thing with the North End, those kids, those young people who went to Hebrew school. They knew that at a certain time there'd be gangs waiting for them, and so there'd be a fist fight or something, or they'd somehow. But it wasn't vicious like some of the things. No one had guns and knives. They had fists. And somebody would end up with a bloody nose.
So there was, in the 20s, a very strong Ku Klux Klan revival here. So it's in the aftermath of that surge of anti-Catholicism, because we had such a wave of immigrants, that was changing the face of the country. What the Klan was a reactionary movement. They wanted to preserve America that they knew back in the turn of the century. They didn't want to see America, the face of America, change. And the Catholics were responsible for that change in their world. They also blamed the Jews, but the Catholics were the main culprits in the changing world.
In the beginning of the 20th century, Catholics, as well as Jews, faced discrimination in Rhode Island. A long tradition of nativism meant that property-based voting restrictions against immigrant populations were not fully lifted in the state until 1928. In the 1920s, the Rhode Island Ku Klux Klan grew and engaged in anti-Semitic, racist, and anti-Catholic activities in the state, including burning a cross near the campus of Providence College on November 6, 1924. In the 1920s and the 1930s, there was a significant uptick in the anti-Semitism among the Italian-American community, purveyed through L'Echo di Rhode Island, the Italian-language newspaper. By 1935, the National Fascist and Anti-Semitic Organization of the Khaki Shirts recruited 1,500 members in Providence before disbanding in 1935. According to historian Eleanor Horwitz, while many Jewish men and women of the North End of Providence recalled little or no anti-Semitism, there were some tensions, especially between Catholic Irish children at St. Patrick's School, near PC's campus, and Jewish children who lived in the vicinity.
Did you ever have any feeling of being singled out because you were Jewish, either from the professors or other students?
No. No one said Jew to you or nothing. In the public school they would, but in Providence College, never.
That was not an issue, and that should be put down. Being Jewish was not an issue to go to Providence College.
Yeah.
No. Never an issue.
No, not on campus. I don't recall ever feeling like that on campus, but there certainly was, wherever you go, and still exists today, unfortunately, is anti-Semitism. There was a bit of anti-Semitism in Fall River, in New Bedford, and I'm sure in Providence too. Nothing that was frightening or anything like that, but there's certain people, for whatever the reason, there is that They resent Jews.
Yeah.
You see all the headlines today. As I never felt any ill feelings or any anti-Semitism, sentiments of anti-Semitism, never on campus.
Though Jewish alumni of the college recalled no anti-Semitism, they did recall some instances of tension.
I never, with the exception of one professor, experienced anything in a negative way of anything. Never. At Providence College. It was very, very close. Those are the days Father Slavin, very reverend, was the president. Father Doyle was the dean. And I recall the relationship I had with both of them. The one exception was Father. You always felt uncomfortable being Jewish with him.
Now, this father, was it things that he said, or was it just sort of his...
He'd look at you, he kind of, when he'd call, he kind of like mispronounced a Jewish name a little. And he was too smart for that, you know, after a while. So, you just did your studies, kept your mouth shut, and got through it. If you've been subjected to or experienced or have knowledge of discrimination, and you're with certain groups, you sense it. They don't have to come out and say it. You just know it.
One stands out really vividly in my mind, and that was at a basketball game. And Boston College had a very good player who was Jewish. And there was one guy sitting down in the stands to my right, in the next section, this is an alumni hall, who wanted to antagonize this guy, and he kept shouting "kike" at him. And this fellow eventually ran up into the stands to go after the clown who was shouting at him. That would have been, I would say, about 1960 or 61. But that was the ugliest anti-Semitic thing that I remember.
On a national scale, Father Charles Coughlin held immensely popular weekly Sunday radio broadcasts throughout the 1930s, which attracted up to 30 million listeners. Despite his increasingly aggressive anti-Semitism, many Catholic families still listened to the weekly broadcasts. The Providence College students at the time were familiar with his name.
But even in 1936, when Coughlin runs a rival candidate against FDR, Boston Catholics, they're still tuning in every Sunday, but they're also voting for FDR. So, the guy on the radio is entertaining and he's popular and so on, but there's little impact, and he almost never shows up in the student newspaper. So I think students may be listening at home with their parents, but there's no real impact, either before or after the turn that he takes in the late 30s.
I remember being a child and being stoned in Dorchester, Massachusetts, by this gang of boys who threw stones at me, and one hit me on the head. And I fell down on the curb, and they were yelling, "Christ killer Jew ball." Even when Pope John Paul said that anti-Semitism is a sin, you can be anti-Semitic and not even realize it. So it's a wonderful thing to say, but how does it translate into how you behave? And structurally, how does it translate into an institution? Those are the big questions.
During the 1930s and 1940s, as a result of the Great Depression and rising need among all sectors of the city, the Jewish community, led by Max Grant, began to reach out in interfaith projects through the Providence Community Fund.
Every time you went on a bus or a trolley and you put your coins in the coin box, it went ka-ching in Max Grant's pocket. He was the inventor of the money meter. That was his thing. He came from a very interesting family, and it was his mother, particularly, who was the founder of the Miriam Hospital. He came from a family where philanthropy was very important. By defining Judaism's moral tenets as broadly as possible, Grant and others could merge them with the tenets of other religions. For example, by defining Judaism as a force for character building and toward good citizenship, Jewish values were transformed into an American ideal. And thus for some, Judaism became defined simply as a moral community of good citizens. And in 1939, he was joined in his civil religious efforts by Father Dillon, president of Providence College, who supported religious cooperation and philanthropy and stated all who believe in God have much in common.
Grant served as the chairman of the Rhode Island Seminar on Human Relationships and served as one of the first chairmen of the National Conference of Christians and Jews, which held a conference on the campus of Providence College in 1932. Thus, at the time of peak anti-Semitism in the United States, Providence College focused on building ties with the Jewish community, its actual neighbors on Smith Hill. What did Providence College do to strengthen Christian-Jewish relations in a time of tension? It was in this context that the Dominican presidents of Providence College made pioneering strides in interreligious efforts. Most notably, Father Lorenzo McCarthy, president of Providence College from 1927 to 1936, served on the executive committee of the Rhode Island Seminar on Human Relationships. Groundbreaking initiative resulted from the collaboration of the Providence Jewish community with the recently formed National Conference of Christians and Jews.
But yes, this was big, right?
Okay.
National Conference of Christians and Jews, it came out of that. This basically, there was a meeting in Chicago, I think it was the first such meeting. All the bishops were supportive of it, Hickey, Keogh, McVinney. But this is just one small piece of a much larger movement at that particular time. And both Protestant Catholics and Jews were involved. Stripe was spread throughout the country, had origins elsewhere, but came here. And here it was embraced by the various religious leaders here. So it did have its origins, but Providence was, and the bishops of Providence were very progressive, if you will. And so they graciously cooperated. And Providence, the presidents of Providence College were quite active.
Later presidents of Providence College continued to be active in fostering Jewish-Christian relations, including Father John Dillon and Father Robert Slavin. In November of 1963, President Father Doyle organized the Conference on Catholic-Jewish Understanding. Participants in the conference discussed a range of issues, including the ongoing discussion at the Second Vatican Council in Rome, where groundbreaking efforts were being made to reshape the Christian-Jewish relationship in the aftermath of the Holocaust. These efforts resulted in the Declaration Nostra Aetate, issued by the Council in October 1965. Nostra Aetate encouraged mutual understanding and respect between Jews and Christians, affirmed the lasting covenant relationship between God and the Jewish people, and decried hatred, persecutions, and displays of anti-Semitism directed against Jews at any time and by anyone. Just days after the promulgation of Nostra Aetate, Providence College hosted another conference on Catholic-Jewish understanding. The youthful new president of the college, William Haas, gave the opening remarks.
I was ordained in 1953, and my first full-time teaching assignment was in 1954, and that was to Emmanuel College in Boston. The reason why Dominicans were sent to Boston to teach at Emmanuel College was because of the consternation, the confusion caused by Father Leonard Feeney, a Jesuit, who was very articulate, and he was relentless in this business of there is no salvation outside the church. And by that he meant outside a formally baptized Roman Catholic.
Leonard Feeney was a priest from a local family who becomes a Jesuit. He and the followers developed this notion of no salvation outside the Catholic Church. Feeney continues to insist on this, ultimately gets excommunicated from the church, and that's when he begins holding open-air rallies on the Boston Common. This is by the early 1950s. And it's at that point that Feeney turns clearly in an anti-Semitic direction.
Cardinal Cushing was getting very severe complaints from other Catholics, but also particularly from other Christians in the area.
Certainly the reaction of the hierarchy locally, very early on in all of this, Archbishop Cushing forbade Catholics in Greater Boston from going to the St. Benedict Center. So in the dispute between Feeney and official church teaching, it's pretty clear early on what the official church position is.
So it was thanks to Father Feeney that I got drawn slowly from my narrow parochialism into the larger world of the tensions between Christians, among Christians, and among Jews. And Cardinal Cushing had a kind of an Irish gut sense that this is tearing everything apart, and somebody's got to do something about it. And he brought the Dominicans in. We opened up a monastery in Dover, Massachusetts, and we did the best we could. So that's how it started for me. And if you push that far enough, you'll find that when Father Feeney died, he was replaced very quickly by others. He didn't disappear, in other words. There are Feeneys all over the place.
The council was greeted with tremendous enthusiasm by some Catholics, and not by others.
Right.
And the attitudes, I mean, the residue of that is visible even today.
Yeah.
I can tell you that the Bishop, McVinney, was the Bishop of Rhode Island during the council, and he was interviewed by one of the television stations as he was going to the airport. And his response to a question was, nothing much is going to happen. Why break up a winning team? There won't be any significant changes. And that was his language, why break up a winning team? That was the kind of triumphalist attitude of one wing of Catholics who didn't expect much from the council and didn't want much from the council. There were others who were very enthusiastic about its coming and about its product, especially the new attitude toward non-Catholics, toward Jews, the whole modernization thing. And it's been that way ever since.
During the era of Vatican II, Presidents Doyle and Haas made concrete efforts to continue to reach out to the local Jewish community.
When I went there, since I had the exposure beforehand, and I knew of the connections to the Jewish community, I said the least we could do is have a competent Jewish professor teach a course in Judaism for the Jewish students and the Catholic kids too, if they could swallow it. So Rabbi Browder was at Brown University, and we contacted him. He was delighted to do it. And he came, and I think that told the Jewish community that we welcomed them. We wanted them to be full participants in the institution.
There were a number of significant Jewish donors to the college who didn't attend. But as the years developed, they'd get involved. Joe Ress was one of those.
Joe Ress, Joseph Ress, who owned the E.A. Adams Jewelry Company. And he was probably one of the leaders in the entire Jewish community. So if Joe Ress said something, everybody else listened. PC gave him an honorary doctorate. Exceptionally generous person. So Joe Ress was the matchmaker, you know, but he was good at it. Oh, and he was a wonderful guy.
You'll find Bob Reisman's name. I don't know if that rings a bell to you. Bob had been president, and Jim Winokur, I think, was president of the President's Council. Bob earlier than Jim. You have a Kuffler building on campus, I believe. I don't think Saul went here. I don't know if he went to any college. But so these people who were industrialists made their way to the college even though they didn't attend.
And so Father Doyle put together a very sophisticated group of business people who had no authority whatsoever. They were just friends willing to help out.
And that, as you trace some of that, I think you'll get an interesting story of seeing the number of Jewish people who didn't go to Providence College, who were generous to it.
And I hardly knew Father Doyle. I mean, he was a great old gentleman. he did one very important thing for the college that opened the college to the Jewish community at another level than simply student interaction. He started what was called the President's Council.
By the early 1960s, declining anti-Semitism, demographic shifts in the Smith Hill neighborhood, and the end of the quota system in higher education led to the decline in number of Jewish students at Providence College.
The paradox itself is historical. In other words, it is part of the picture. And some things in history are better left as puzzles. In other words, something, you can guess what happened. You'd think the college would be more hospitable because of Vatican II, and it would have been less hospitable in those old days. There may have been a strange complacency where sometimes, let's say, if a Jewish kid goes to PC and he has to take religion courses, and it's a formula, everybody does the same thing, there's less tension and less confrontation that if somebody says, now you're free to do this or that.
There was one priest who actually asked me, why would someone who was Jewish, who graduated from Providence College, even run for, let alone be elected, as alumni president? And my reaction was, why not? And I gave back to him the explanation that Father Peterson gave me. Providence College is a big tent, and we have room for everybody. And he said, and that's what makes Providence College great.